Okay, welcome to episode 2 of It's the Food, It's the Food, It's the Food. Tonight we'll be talking about from 1967 to to exactly May 19th, 1969. Remember that date, May 19th, 1969. And the title of the episode is Grammy and When Food is Love. But before we get going on that, I just want to say what this is, not about. And I'm not making, a thing about weight loss. This is not about weight loss. And let's see here. This is something that I found today, and I didn't even realize this is goes back to 10/31 Halloween 2016, and I just remember I had gotten back up to 271 pounds, and and this is basically eating plant-based foods. But I imagine I must have gotten on with snack cakes again. I was probably eating snack cakes. I was eating tubs and tubs of commercial hummus, bags of potato chips, and things must have been out of control. I don't really remember. I was going through a very rough time in my life. My marriage was falling apart. My now soon-to-be ex-wife was just running amok with her life, and I was dealing with everything. And but I checked in that I went. It was a Monday night. I remember it was a Monday night. I was 271 pounds, and the first week, or was it 2 weeks? Okay, we went back 2 weeks on the 14th. So in 2 weeks, I had lost 13.6. On a week after that, I had lost 18 pounds, and on the what was really the 5th week, 5 weeks, I lost 4.4. So that's a grand total of about 23 pounds, 248, 58, 68, 970. So 23 pounds in 5 weeks. I could lose weight. And I have a history, and we're going to go through that history of me losing weight and what I had to go through to lose it, and to get to that point, only to put it back on again. And here I am. I don't know, somewhere in the in the 90s or the early 2000s, heavy. Here I am. I worked at a comedy club. This is a very funny. It was a guy by the name of John Panette. Did a great comedy act on food and buffets. You Go Now, the Chinese buffet, and I got to meet him and get to know him a little bit. And he ended up dying of a heart attack. This was in '98. I was losing weight. It was actually one of my on my own weight losses, and there I am somewhere in the early '90s, thin and fit and trim and weightlifting and running every day, and so I could lose weight, and maintaining weight I could not do. Maintaining a weight loss was just, and it would just baffle me to no end of how I could work so hard, how I could follow a program only to put it all back on again, and then some. How could I go back to that? How could I get back to that? How could I go from this back to this or this? It made no sense to me. And tonight's episode is going to be from 1967 to May 19th, 69, and it's Grammy. And we got into my mother. On the first episode of my mother didn't like to cook. My mother did it out of necessity. She was something she had to do, and convenience foods at best. We didn't eat out much. There wasn't much takeout, or back in those days, pizza, Chinese, and fast food, But there was a lot of convenience foods, instant potatoes, canned vegetables, and just the normal chicken, pork, chopped meat, pasta. Did she make casseroles? Not really. She didn't really. There's no creating. There was nothing going on. She just basic, straightforward, just the bare minimum. of putting something out to eat. And cereal for breakfast, cornflakes, Rice Krispies. On the weekends, bologna sandwiches, peanut butter and jelly. Occasionally fruit in the house, but not much. There's a lot of snacks, a lot of Kool-Aid, soda, milk. Oh, milk every day. Cheese, always big blocks of cheese and cold. Bologna and occasionally, did they get not turkey and roast beef, but occasionally, but that would go very quickly. And but today's episode, the focus is going to be on Grammy and my father's mother, the only grandparent that I knew, and she was the opposite. My father grew up with the opposite type person. She loved to cook. She was an unbelievable cook. Now I was a small child. I wouldn't have known the extent of it, but I knew it was good, and I knew that she loved me, and I knew that when everything she did was beautiful. Here she is, and they said he used to tell her to put me down. That she held me constantly. And if you look at this, she made her own clothes. She was just she sewed and she cooked and she cleaned, and her house was immaculate. And I had a sister come along in '65, and she was still working then. And then in '66, she retired. In August when she turned 65, she retired from work, and I became her full-time devotion, and I spent more and more time with her. And then I had a brother come along, and there was now 3 of us, and she was only with me. This is very rare that this is at my house, and that she would come over. And normally she'd come over and get me, and it was just her and I. And she did a lot of volunteer for senior citizens. She took people to get grocery shopping. For shut-ins, she did a lot of volunteer work, and we ate out all in people's houses, not in restaurants, but we would go for lunches, beautiful homes, Italians with the plastic on the furniture, and it was an unbelievable life. And I would go home to this this basic whatever my mother was serving, and then back to her house to just. I mean, she made her own jams and jellies. She made her own pickles. She made her own spaghetti sauce. Everything she didn't use canned tomatoes. She canned her own. She would get tomatoes from a garden, and she would make her own can. She would keep. Constant, huge garden, and all the people she knew had gardens, and they would exchange stuff. So it was always fresh vegetables, always. The freshest, and it would be served. I remember whenever it was served, it was on a beautiful plate with beautiful at a dining room table, and everything was perfect. And this is how I ate with her every single day. She was an elegant, demure, beautiful person, beautiful woman, and it was quite a contrast. And this, my father and the grandfather I never met. He died in 1944 of a massive heart attack. Got up on a Sunday morning, went to take a bath before church, and just clutched his chest and died instantly in a bathtub, was gone. And so my father at age 14, he was an impeccable guy. He was the paymaster of the electric company in town here, Central Hudson. He was the guy that's, when electric was still a relatively new thing, and he was in charge of the payroll department. He signed the paychecks. He had a big job, and my father was set to go to military school. My father was in the 8th grade when he died. It was May 19th, 1944, that I guess he just dropped dead, clutched his chest, and that was it. And so my father ended up going to just the regular high school. He was all set to go to military school, private military school, and his father's dream for him was to go to West Point, and so he was out of the picture. And I said, my grandmother was just, the most loving, beautiful person, and the contrast between, it's food from those years, and from the age of 3, 4, 5, 6, food was love. Food for her, it was two different worlds to be in, and I learned quickly not to mention, well, Grammy made this or Grammy did that. My mother, who was a violent, there she is. She was a bipolar, wacky upside the head. My father could be very, very violent and very, very mean. I talked about in episode 1. There's my 3rd birthday. There's another one of those boiled frosting cakes. But this is what I would go from this to this, to just the most loving person, to a maniac, and back and forth. But I learned at that age. I learned that food was could be used as reward. It was used as punishment. It was if I was good, I got a treat, and if I was bad, I went to bed without my supper or didn't get dessert. So food had power. It was a powerful thing, and when I was with Grammy, food was love. It was absolute, an expression of devotion, and I of course didn't know this at the time, but what changed? I'll tell you. May 19th, 1969. It was a Saturday morning. I'll never forget it. And how could I? It was, wake up. She made little pancake men. She had a little mold, and it was like a little, these little pancake men with raisins for their eyes and belly buttons, and beautifully be omelets and eggs and cheese and toast and juice and whatever, with her homemade jelly. And I probably had lunch that day, and in the early afternoon she sat in her chair, her eyes rolled back in her head, and I thought she fell asleep, is what I thought. And a little time went by, and I tried to wake her up, and she wouldn't wake up. And I ended up going out into the backyard, and there was a little boy that lived next door, and went over to his house and told his mother, who happened to be a nurse, I said, Grammy fell asleep and she won't wake up. She goes, what do you mean? Well, I tried to wake her up. She won't wake up. And she went over, and the next thing you know, they wouldn't let me in the house, and an ambulance showed up and took Grammy out, and I never saw Grammy again. Grammy had a massive stroke, massive brain hemorrhage stroke, and died instantly right in front of me that day. And you say, well, what changed? What could have been the change? I was back home at that point, literally that night. I'm back home to this. I'm back home, with now 3, and there was a 3rd, my sister. I don't have a picture. There's a picture of my Grammy with the 3, with all of us, all 4 of us. Now there's 4 kids, and I'm home with 2 babies. One is 4 months old. One is a year, was a year in age difference. 14 months old or 16 months old, and a 4-year-old. My sister was 4. And now I'm home that night. And for every night after that, with barely enough to eat. Food was no longer abundant. It was no longer love. It was now a struggle. And so that's going to end this episode. We will get into the next episode of what life was like after that with food. And where it would never be the same again. I can't describe the type of person that Grammy was. I could never do it justice to say just how beautiful it was, and just how my life changed from that moment, from May 19th, 1969. It would never be the same again. And who knows, if that hadn't happened, what it would have been like. But it happened, and that was it. So, if this is down the road and this thing grows and people watch it, please like, please subscribe, please leave a comment. Let me know if you identify with any of this, and we'll get on to another episode, and we'll get there to what finally happened, and how I finally overcame the obesity in my life. And that's it. Out.